I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 132, False Positives. Your life does not have to revolve around your husband's pornography addiction. You are not defined by his choices or by what he sees on a screen. You are not just the porn addict's wife. You are so much more. In this podcast, I'm going to teach you how to go from handling it to healed, because I've been where you are and you don't have to stay there. My name is Jolene Wynn. I'm a member of the LDS Faith, a certified life coach, and a wife of a former porn addict. And this is a podcast for the porn addict's wife. Hello, my ladies. How are you? I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope you guys have wonderful plans for Thanksgiving. If you guys are Canadian, you already had Thanksgiving. I hope it was great a long time ago. But in America, it is the week of Thanksgiving, which is beautiful. I am recording this ahead of time because during the week of Thanksgiving, I will be in Florida, which I am excited about. And I probably will have already set up for Christmas by the time you guys are hearing this. I know that sounds crazy, but I love Christmas. I think it should come earlier every year. I can't believe it's been an entire year since last Christmas. And I realized that when I got back from Florida, then it would pretty much be December. And I wanted to set up before that. So I probably will have already set up for Christmas, which if you guys are cringing at that, I apologize. But today, you guys, I want to talk about false positives. I just got off a coaching call with a client. When I have new clients sign up, I do a one-on-one call with them, and I do it as a deep dive. What we do is we take time one-on-one to do emotional processing, which you guys have heard me talk about before. I want every single one of my clients to be very confident in their ability to process their emotions, to feel their feelings. That is an incredible life skill that once you master, you can then teach to your children and completely change their life. And so it is something that I spend individual time doing with each one of my clients. Now, sometimes this happens on group coaching calls. We have the time to do it, but sometimes we don't. And so that's why I do one-on-one calls with each of my clients. So I just got off a one-on-one call with my client, and we were talking about a sneaky thought that she had. And I labeled it a false positive. And I was like, I have got to do a podcast on this and call it false positives, just like pregnancy tests. Okay, ladies, because that's what this is. Okay, let's talk about false positives. These are the sneaky thoughts that we have that seem positive, but they're not. Okay? We have these in all areas of our life, in every single situation. They're thoughts that just sound really beautiful, but they don't actually produce a positive result. And the way that you know whether or not something is a sneaky thought or not is by seeing and checking what kind of a result it's creating. Okay, so if you think about the self-coaching model, which if you guys have listened to the podcast, you know what that is, but let's refresh it a little bit. Okay, the self-coaching model is CTFAR. Okay, we have circumstances, which is the letter C, circumstances in our life. These are the things outside of our control. These are the facts that we have to deal with. And then we have our thoughts. That's the T. Thoughts are just sentences in our brain. And the thoughts that we have create our feelings. Feelings are vibrations within our body, and every feeling that we have inspires action. It determines what we do and do not do. We do different things when we're scared than when we are excited or when we are anxious, right? The feelings that we feel inspire different action, and all of those actions add up to create different results, which is the R. Okay, so the false positives, the way that you know whether or not a thought is creating something positive or negative, whether it is a sneaky thought, whether it's a sneaky positive thought, whether it's a false positive or an actual positive, is by seeing what it creates, right? So you kind of just plug it into the model. You write down the thought and you say, okay, when I'm thinking this, how do I feel? And when I'm feeling that way, what do I do? And when I'm doing that, what does it create? Okay, and you look at the result line. This is when it's super helpful to have a coach, because sometimes this can get very tricky and we can't see very clearly each of these steps. But when you look at the result that it's creating, that is how you can tell whether or not the thought is positive or whether it's a false positive. In the scriptures, if you guys know scripture, this is when I talk about by their fruits, ye shall know them, right? It's like, look at the result, look at their life, look at the things they're doing and creating, and that's how you're going to tell whether it's a good seed or not, right? That's kind of the analogy throughout the scriptures, is when you plant a seed, the way that you know whether or not it's good is what it produces. And that can be the same thing about your thoughts. Whether you know it's a good thought or not a good thought, a false positive or an actual positive, is by seeing what kind of results it creates in your life. So let's go through a couple of examples, okay? Okay, the first example then that I hear a lot is, well, I just want to be helpful. Isn't that a beautiful thought? Such a good one, right? I just want to be helpful. Okay, well, let's look at that. Because sometimes that is an actual positive thought and sometimes that is a false positive. When you think, I just want to be helpful, sometimes that can actually lead you to feeling a little anxious and overwhelmed, because you're trying to figure out how to be helpful, right? And when you are feeling anxious and overwhelmed, maybe you start overanalyzing. Maybe you start checking in on him 14 times a day. Maybe he's asked you, right? Maybe the circumstance is that he's asked you to be his accountability partner. And you're like, totally, I just want to be helpful. But maybe you feel anxious and overwhelmed and you're like, okay, but I just want to make sure that I'm doing this right. And so you check in 14 times a day and you're constantly monitoring his phone and you're always bringing it up and you never shut up about it. And you're always on guard and you're always just trying to share podcasts and talks and conversations and books and articles. And you're just throwing all of this at him and it's just kind of vomiting onto him all of these things that you're learning, and it actually starts to push him away because he's getting a little worried, or he gets a little upset because he gets a little defensive, and it brings up all of his stuff, and he has a lot of shame and he has a lot of guilt, and maybe he doesn't want to talk about it quite as much, and so he actually starts to pull away a little bit. And so then it's actually creating a distance between you, right? That would be the result, would be the distance. And so that would be an example of a false positive, a thought that sounds really beautiful, like, yeah, I just want to help. But it's actually not producing anything helpful. In fact, it's creating the opposite result. You're not helping, you're actually making it worse unintentionally, or creating a rift between you or a distance unintentionally, right? Again, this is just a hypothetical scenario, but this is an example of a false positive, a thought that sounds really pretty, but it's not actually helpful. There's another thought that I hear all the time that I want to bring up, and this is so common, is I just don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want them to feel blank. You guys ever thought this? Are my people pleasers? Are you guys listening? If you identify as a people pleaser, please raise your hand, okay? I don't want them to feel blank. That is a false positive. It is a thought that sounds really pretty. And guess what happens when you think that? You feel, however it is that you feel when you think that, you might feel anxious, you might feel upset, you might feel embarrassed. And then you do different things. When you are trying to prevent someone else from feeling an emotion, then you try to manipulate your surroundings. You change your behavior because what you are trying to do is change how the other person feels. And the way that your brain says to do that is to try to be who you think they think you should be. Okay? They don't know that we know they know we know. If you guys know, friends, you guys know that part. But this is what happens, my people pleasers. You start to do things in order to try and shift the circumstances to change how the other person feels. And what ends up happening is that we unintentionally become manipulative. Now, we don't usually use that word in this scenario. We say something nice like, well, I'm just trying to help and I just don't want them to feel blank. But that isn't actually what we're doing. What we're doing is actively trying to manipulate the other person. We're trying to change the circumstances in order to try to change how they feel. And this never results in anything positive, because even if you did everything that you think they think you should do, you still can't change their emotions. And this is when you feel like you're running ragged, because you spend so much of your emotional energy on this hamster wheel, trying to control your surroundings in order to change how the other person feels. And the only reason, ladies, that you want to change how the other person feels is because you think it's bad if they feel however it is they feel, which is why your brain thinks, I just don't want them to feel blank. I don't want them to feel hurt. I don't want them to feel upset. So you end up inviting them to the thing that you don't want them there at, And then they feel awkward the entire time, and you feel awkward the entire time. And maybe you're trying to overcompensate, and they feel that, and they get rubbed off the wrong way. And then they get mad, and they leave grumpy. And then you ended up having them feel hurt anyway, when that's what you were trying to avoid in the first place, right? Whenever you have a situation, ladies, whenever you have a thought that has something to do with the other person's emotion, I just don't want them to feel blank, that is a big red flag. Now, one of the reasons that our brain likes to keep this thought is because it sounds so pretty. It's a false positive. And it sounds like if we let it go, then what will happen is we will just be really rude and not care about other people's feelings and walk all over them and become a jerk. But that is not what happens, ladies. You guys are all nice people, okay? You guys are high caliber women. You don't want to hurt other people's feelings. And letting go of the thought, I just don't want to make them feel blank, or I just don't want them to feel blank, is not going to be the thing that turns you into a jerk. Okay? But what it will do is allow yourself to let go of all the manipulation, let go of all the people pleasing, because it never works anyway. Now, I want to bring up the example that actually came up on the coaching call with my client today. Okay, we were doing her one-on-one, and she was processing some emotion so beautifully. And one of the thoughts that she gave just while she was processing was, if I were different, then he'd feel different about me, and then I'd feel different about me. And this is what kind of sparked this idea for this podcast, because as I was explaining it to her, I thought I really need to tell everybody this because it's something I run into so often. Okay, she has a thought error in here. Okay, it's a false positive. That sounds really nice. Doesn't it sound pretty? If I were different, then he'd feel differently about me, and then I'd feel differently about me. It sounds like a really pretty thought. It sounds very nice, and it doesn't even sound wrong. It's a false positive, and here's how. Okay, her thought is, if I were different, then he'd feel differently about me. The thought error in there is that you being different is somehow going to change the way that he feels. Ladies, the way that he feels about you is because of his thoughts. You could be exactly who you think he thinks you should be. You could be exactly who you think he wants, and he's still going to have his thoughts that are going to change how he feels. Okay? His thoughts protect his feelings, just like your thoughts protect yours. Okay? So even if you were exactly the thing, the woman, the sexual partner that you think he wants, or you think he thinks he wants, he still has his thoughts that are going to be creating his feelings. You do not have control over how he feels. So even if you changed 100% of yourself, he still can feel however he's going to feel, because it's not coming from you or the way that you look or the way that you are or what you do. It's coming from his thoughts. Okay? Her thought was, if I were different, then he'd feel differently about me, and then I'd feel differently about me. And again, I want to offer that this is a lie, because what happens is she's confusing in her brain what creates her feelings about herself. Her thought is, if I were different, if I did different things, if I showed up different, if I put out more, if I did whatever it is, okay, if I were different, then he'd feel differently about me. And if he felt differently about me, then I'd feel differently about me, which is also a lie. It's the same lie in reverse. The lie is how he feels creates how I feel. It's a lie, ladies. Him not wanting to be with you sexually, or him looking at pornography, which is not the same thing, okay? Him looking at pornography, him feeling however he feels, him feeling anxious or depressed, does not change how you feel. Your thoughts protect your feelings, just like his thoughts protect his, okay? However he feels about you is not dictating how you feel about yourself. Your thoughts are what dictate how you feel about yourself, and you have control over your thoughts. So he could change his feelings about you if he wanted to, and it's still not going to directly and automatically change how you feel about yourself. Do you guys follow me? I'm going to hound this in because this is so important, ladies. Okay? It doesn't matter what you do. He's going to think and feel however he thinks and feels. Okay, again, this is not an excuse for you to go be a jerk to him and say, well, you're in charge of your own thoughts and feelings. You still get to be, you have to be proud of the way that you show up. You don't have to, but that's our role in our life, right? Is to show up, and then we get to analyze, and we have to live with our own selves and our own actions, right? So I would encourage you to show up in a way that you're proud of, which generally in most cases is us being not a jerk. Okay, especially to our spouse, even if he does something that hurts our feelings. Okay, so when you act however you're going to act, it's not necessarily going to change the way that he feels about you. He has control over his thoughts that generate his feelings. And the way that he feels about you is not going to change how you feel about yourself. If you don't like the way you feel about yourself, ladies, if you're waiting for him to change how he feels about you in order for you to start feeling better, you're going to be waiting forever. Okay? He cannot change how you feel about yourself. What you do and do not do does not change how he feels about you. That comes from his thoughts. And the way that he feels about you does not change how you feel about yourself. That comes from your thoughts. So if you feel some way about yourself right now that you don't like, if you feel anxious, if you feel rejected, if you feel worthless, if you feel guilty, if you feel disgusted, if you feel unwanted and embarrassed and humiliated, if you feel like you're not confident, if you feel like you're not enough, then the solution to that is not to look toward what he's doing or what he's thinking or how he's feeling about you. It's looking toward your thoughts. And this is the best news, ladies, because your thoughts are something you can control. I don't have any control over how he feels about you. I wish I did. I would teach you all yesterday how to change him if I could. I don't know how to change him. I know how to help you change yourself if you want to. If you don't want to feel the way that you feel about yourself, the solution is not looking to him. It's not looking to try to manipulate him, doing different things, becoming who you think he wants you to be so that he'll feel differently about you, so that you can feel differently about yourself. Because I've been down that road, ladies, and it never works. Most of you have been down that road and can tell me that it never works. This is a false positive. This is a lie. This is a sentence that looks really beautiful, and it doesn't ever work. Okay? Now, another example of this false positive, is this idea of, well, I just want them to be happy. Have you guys ever thought that? Isn't that a beautiful thought? It's the reverse of, I just don't want them to feel blank that we just talked about, right? This is the reverse of that same thought. I just want them to be happy. I just want to be happy. Ladies, this is a beautiful thought that is a false positive. Okay, and you can check this by looking at the results that it creates. If your thought is, well, I just want them to be happy, or I have another client who came up, this was her thought. She said, I have a deep sense of responsibility for people that I care about. Isn't that a beautiful thought? Oh, it's so pretty. Okay, well, here's what happens. When you feel like you have a responsibility for somebody else's emotional well-being and their emotional state, then you're going to try to manipulate, and this was what happening in her life. She tried to start manipulating and maneuvering the circumstances and the way that she interacted with those people in her life in order to try to change how they felt, which is not you living your life. It's living the life that you think you should in order to try to create another person's emotional well-being. You guys, what is the word that I'm looking for? State. Why was that so hard to think of? Okay. Their emotional state. And if they're not happy, then it's somehow your fault. Do you guys see this? This is why it's a false positive, because if you think that other people's emotional states are your responsibility, then great, you get to take credit for when they're happy, but then you also have to take the blame for when they're not. That is a heavy burden, ladies. That is not your responsibility, and it's impossible, which is why you feel, again, so run ragged. Now, ladies, I want you to especially think about this in case if you have children, okay? Because we do this so much with our kids. I just want my kids to be happy. I just want my kids to be successful. I just want my kids to not feel anxious. I just want to feel whatever, right? We do this so much with our kids, and it's such a false positive, because what we end up doing, again, like I've been saying, is we just run ourselves ragged, trying to manage their circumstances, make sure they get into the right school, help them with their homework, try to create their friends, try to give them all the things that make them happy. And I'm not saying all those things are terrible, but when you're doing it in an attempt to change the way that they feel, you're always going to be run ragged. And yes, when they feel happy, that's awesome. And we get this little kick to our pride because we feel like we had something to do with it. But then when they don't, then it's our fault. Now, our brain really likes this because if it's our fault, then it means there's something we can do to change it. Our brain would rather believe in the false positive than believe in the fact that we don't have any control over how other people feel. Our brain doesn't like that. It doesn't like not having control. That is scarier to our brain. It's scarier to our brain to not have control than it is to have this false sense of control, which is why it does it so often. So what I want you guys to understand and to recognize and start becoming aware of is that it's okay to recognize the things that you don't have control over. And one of those things is other people's emotions. And that's okay. And that's exactly how it's designed. And thank goodness you don't have control over other people's emotions because you can't even get control of your own emotions, let alone trying to help somebody else with theirs, right? I mean, tell me I'm right. Okay? It's hard enough to be responsible for your own emotions. You can just let everyone else be responsible for theirs. Again, this doesn't give you permission to go be a jerk, but just notice how common it is, how much your brain wants to have this false positive. This notion that somehow you're responsible for the emotional state of those people around you because your brain would rather have this false sense of control than admit that it has no control. That's much harder because of how it makes you feel. How do you feel when you have no control? You might feel a little helpless. And that's a very hard emotion to sit with if you don't know how to process your feelings, especially when your brain thinks that feeling helpless means that you are helpless, which is not the same thing. Okay? Totally different podcast episode. But I wanted to bring that up and show you the reverse side because I think that happens a lot more than we think. Those false positive thoughts that we have, they come out in really beautiful phrases. Things like, well, I just want everything to be fair. Isn't that a pretty thought? So pretty. You guys can go listen to my episode on fairness and you'll get all my thoughts on that. But there are so many ideas and thoughts that we have that are just wrapped in beautiful little packages in these false positives. So I want to encourage you ladies to start paying attention to the thoughts that you have, and they're going to be all over. Maybe you have some of the ones that I talked about today, but maybe you have a lot of different ones. But just start paying attention to the thoughts that you have. And if you're questioning whether or not it's a false positive or a true positive, then just take it through the model and start looking and seeing what it creates, right? Look at the result that it creates. So you have your thought, and you think, how do I feel when I think this? What do I do when I feel that way? And what are those actions creating in my life? What is that culminating in? Okay. Now, if you want help with this, come coach with me. I will help you work through this. This is a skill that even I get coached on because it's so, like I've talked about before, it's like we have blinders on. It's so hard to see in a straight line when we're always looking at ourselves. We get very locked in to a certain way of thinking that we miss all of the other variables. So if you need help with this, that's totally fine. Come coach with me and I'll help you. Okay. But start looking at it and start seeing what results are being created with your thoughts. And you'll be able to tell whether it's a true positive or a false positive. All right, ladies, I love you guys so much. I hope you guys have a great week. Happy Thanksgiving. I'll talk to you next week. So take care. All right, ladies, if you are loving what you are learning on the podcast, I want to invite you to come join my coaching program. This is where we take it to the next level and we actually start applying and learning the how of moving forward. This podcast has taught you the what, and the coaching program is where you're going to learn the how. This is where you learn how to actually start moving forward, process all of that pain that you feel, and let it go once and for all. If you are ready to finally move forward and stop living a life that revolves around your husband's pornography addiction, then I want to invite you to come join me today. Just head to my website, joleneWynn.com, and sign up today. I can't wait to see you there.